In this lecture, we will be installing Ruby 3.3 version. So for that, first of all, we need to visit the website ruby-lang.org website. And here you can click on download Ruby. And because I will be using Windows throughout this course, I will be going for the Ruby installer. So now you're taken to the rubyinstaller.org website and you can simply click on download. So when you click on download, you have two different options to go for the Ruby installers. One is with DevKit, the other one is without DevKit. And we will be installing the Ruby DevKit 3.3 of the x64. So I will just go ahead and try to click on the Ruby plus DevKit 3.3.0. And once this gets installed, we will start the installation process for the Ruby. So by default, this installer uses the MSys2 toolchain as its dev kit. And in fact, MSys2 is required for us to build native our C++ extensions for Ruby. And it is also pretty much essential for the Ruby on Rails. And MSys2 allows the download and usage of the open source libraries, which our Ruby gems often depend upon. So that's why we are going for the Ruby with DevKit installation. So I'm going to choose this one. I will say keep, and then I will say keep anyway. And then we're going to simply run the exe file. So I'm going to click on the open file and we will complete the installation process for the Ruby. So install for me only, which is okay for me. And simply accept and click on next. And notice that it's going to install Ruby into our C drive, Ruby 33-x64 folder. And it is also going to add Ruby executables to the path of our system environment variables. And it is also going to associate .rb and .rb Ruby and Ruby for Windows files with the Ruby installation. So which is okay. And then I'm going to simply click on install and click on yes. Now you have a couple of options here. So it's going to install the Ruby 3. Base files, RA and HTML documentation. And then I'm also going for the MSys2 development tool chain. And then I'm going to click on next. So now we can see Ruby has been installed successfully. So one last step is to go ahead and try to install the MSys2 tool chain. So I'm going to click on finish, leaving this checkbox checked. And the moment we click on finish, it will start the installation process for the MSys2. So we have a couple of options here. Which components shall be installed? So I will go for the MSys2 base installation and then the tool chain. So I'm going to type 1,3 and then I press enter. And this will take a while for this to get installed. So now you can see the message that the MSys2 has been installed successfully. And at the end, it will ask you for the, the same prompt. This time you just press enter to finish the installation process. So at this point of time, Ruby has been installed. So you can simply go back to your command prompt. And once I'm in the command prompt, you can verify the installation of Ruby by just typing Ruby -- version. And we should be able to see the version as 3.3. So that's how we got ready with the Ruby installation. Now in the next lecture, we will see how to get ready with the Rails installation. In this lecture, we will see the installation process for the Rails. Notice I'm currently in a website called as the rubyonrails.org. So this is where you will find the complete documentation for the Ruby on Rails. And in fact, we will be working with the 7.1.3.2 release of Rails. So now, first of all, let me take you to the command prompt. And we will be installing Rails with the help of the Rails package manager. That's what we call as the gem. So I'm going to use the command Rails gem followed by install. And what you want to install is Rails, and then I press enter. And this is going to install the latest version of Rails on your system. So now you can see the message that it has installed successfully Rails version 7.1.3.2. And in fact, you can verify the version that you currently have on your system by typing Rails -- version. So that's how we got ready with the Ruby as well as the Rails installation so far. So we have Ruby version 3.3 and Rails version 7.1.3.2. And at any point of time, if you wish to uninstall Rails, you should say gem uninstall and then Rails. And then you simply press enter, then Rails will be uninstalled. And then if you want, you can go for the installation of the Rails of a different version or the latest version. You can also use the command gem which Rails do you have on your system. So then it will show you the same output like we have the Rails 7.1.3. So that's how we got ready with the Ruby and Rails. In this lecture, I will go ahead and try to create our very first Rails web application. So notice inside my D drive, I have a folder called as the Rails codes, and it's an empty folder. So if you want to create a brand new Rails web application, the command for you to create a new application is Rails followed by the keyword new. And what's the name of the project? So I'm going to call this as the basics of Rails, and then I'm going to press enter. So it's going to create a brand new project. So notice when I did this for the very first time on this new system environment, I'm getting an error related to the Git. So ideally, if GitHub is not installed on your system, so that's the time you get an error. So in fact, I do not have Git installed on this computer. So one option is you install it and then recreate the brand new project. Otherwise, you can skip the Git installation part. So I can say Rails new, and the project name is basics of Rails, and then I'm going to specify -g, and then I will specify the skip Git option here. And then when I press enter, this time we will not be getting that error, and in fact it is going to create a brand new Rails web application for you. So now you can see the Rails brand new web application has been created, and so many gems were installed as part of the project creation. So if I see the directory now, we see a new folder called as the basics of Rails. So I switch to that folder by typing cd basics of Rails, and we can simply open that source code in the Visual Studio Code editor by just typing code dot. So now you can see the different folders that are part of your Rails web application project, and then the various files. So obviously I'll be explaining to you the project anatomy or the significance of every folder and every file that you see by default as part of your Rails web application project. So first of all, before I get into the source code and then I explain to you, we can run this application as it is without making any modifications to the boilerplate code that got written as part of the new project creation. So how do we run our application? You can simply type Rails space server, and then it is going to host your application on the development server, and then you will be able to access the port number 3000 to see the default home page for your Rails web application. So you can see now when I typed Rails server, it is trying to host a website on a port number called as 3000. So I can press Control key and then I can click on that URL. So now you can see your default Rails home page getting displayed here. So if we see this window, if we see this page, it means that we have successfully have the Ruby as well as the Rails, and everything is configured properly so that we can go ahead and try to write our own custom logic. In this lecture, we will see how we can get ready with a new controller of our choice. So by default, when this project got created, as you can see in the apps folder, we have a controllers folder, and then we have the application underscore controller class here. So this is the only controller that we have by default. But now we would like to create our own controller, and that controller should be having some actions. So let's see, how do we create a new controller? So for that, let me take you to my command prompt, and I stop this development server by pressing Ctrl C. And we're going to run a special command to create a brand new controller. So I'm going to type Rails generate controller, and what's the controller name we would like to give? I would like to have the controller name as home, and then I press enter. And you can see here it does a couple of things. So first of all, it has created for me a new file called as home underscore controller.ruby file inside the controllers folder under app folder. So notice we only give the controller name as home, but the name of the file is home_controller. So as per the conventions of MVC, it is automatically adding this underscore controller at the end of the file name. And you can also see it has created a new folder called as the home inside the views folder under our app. So when I expand my app folder and then when I expand the controllers, so now you can see there is a new class called as the home controller. And also you can see inside the views folder, there is a new folder called as the home. So by default, whatever is your controller name, and the folder name should be exactly similar to the controller name that we have in the app controllers folder. So that is how, as per the MVC architectural design pattern conventions, the folder name, the subfolder name in the views has to match to the name of the controller. So that's how we have a new file in the controllers folder and a new folder in the views. And it has also created for you a unit test.rb file that you can see in the test folders, controllers, and you can see home controller underscore test.rb. And finally, you can also verify there is a helper file got created here. So by default, if you can go into the helpers folder under app, you see there is a file called as home_helper.rb file. So that is how we have 4 different new files got added to the project. I will explain to you the purpose of the helpers in the upcoming lectures. Currently, I just want to focus on the controllers and views. So first of all, let's go ahead and try to write some code inside our controller. So I will go to my controllers folder and then I open my homecontroller.rb file. Now every controller is a collection of actions. Actions are nothing but technically some kind of functions. So I'm going to say def and I'm going to create a new action called as index and then I close it. Now let's say, for example, I just want to render some hello world message from my index action of the home controller. So I'm going to say render in a plain text format. I'm going to render a message something like, say, hello world from Rails 7. So once this is done, if I try to access my index action of my home controller in my URL inside your browser, it has to render this message for me. So here plain means whatever you typed, it will just render it as it is here. There are different other rendering formats we have in Rails like HTML, JSON, XML, JavaScript like that. So currently we will be focusing on the plain text as well as the HTML text in this lecture. So once this is done, the final step we still have to perform in order to test this index action is you need to go into the config folder, and in the config folder there is an important file called as routes.rb. So here I need to specify when somebody has to be redirected to the index action of the home controller, means what the URL that people will be typing inside the browser's URL bar and what type of request they will be making. So I'm saying here, so they will be making the GET request, and if they type home/index, then implies then I should be redirecting them to the home controller's index action. So what you type in this double quotes can be anything of your choice. I'm just typing it as home/index. It can be just index or it can be just home. That's up to you. But what you type here should be matching to your controller name. Home is your controller name without the word controller, and your action name is index exactly in lowercase because it's case sensitive. So that's how every time when you create a new action in your controller, you should be making an entry in the routes.rb file as well. So with this, we are done with the implementation. So let me go back to my browser. And last time when we access the 3000 port, we are seeing the home page here. But this time I'm going to type here this home/index here. So I'm going to say /home/index and then I press enter. So now we should be able to see the message that. So now you can see this message hello world from Rails 7 is coming up from the index action. we were just rendering this plain text here. Okay, let me comment this line. So this time I would like to render some message in the HTML format. So I'm going to say again the same message, hello world from Rails 7, but this time I'm using the HTML h1 tag here. So we just commented this line because there can only be one render statement inside any action. So now if I go back to my browser and if I refresh, now you can see your text is getting displayed here. So surprisingly, even though we gave the render format as HTML, so currently the HTML tags are not getting executed or processed. That's because we should be calling a special method called as HTML underscore safe. Then the browser understand, obviously it has to process the HTML tags and then render the output. So by default it is disabled. And so when I call the HTML save, so you are actually taking you're declaring whatever you're writing here. It's a safe code for the browser to parse. So now you can see the message got converted to the h1 tag. So in these two scenarios, obviously we were displaying some hard-coded message. Okay, let's say for example, I'm going to take this message into a variable, something like say message equals to so and so, and I'm going to have the different heading levels here. Okay, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. So I'm going to concatenate the existing value of the message with the new message. And this is 4, 5, 6, and this is going to be 2, 3, 4, 5. Perfect. So that's how we have the different messages here. This is 3, 4, 5, and 6. Now finally, we should be returning this variable from the action. So I'm going to say render HTML. So this time what you would like to render is the message, and by calling the HTML.safe method, and I'm going to comment my previous line here. So this time we are trying to render the value of this variable, and we are calling the HTML.safe method. So when I go back to my browser and when we refresh, now we can see the heading levels from h1 to h6. So that is how in this very first action of our very first controller, and where we made our very first entry in the routes.rb, we did a very simple exercise by rendering some messages onto the browser to understand the execution lifecycle of your Rails controller's actions. In this lecture, we will try to have another new action, and we'll try to improvise the previously created index action. So in the previous scenario, we were hard coding some message within our source code. Let's say, for example, we would like to allow users to pass some value to this variable as part of the query string. So to get this done, let me come up with a new action. Let's call this as get query string values. So that's going to be my new action. So ideally, when we run our application, we would like to pass some values as part of the URL query string. So Rails has obviously features to receive those query string values in the form of the params hash. So what I'm going to do inside my new action, I'm going to first verify if the user has supplied any value for the message, and that value we are trying to obviously access it from the params hash. So if there is a value supplied by the user for the message parameter, so then I'm going to have a variable called as message, and then I'm going to say that you have supplied a value for the message, which is params of your message query string parameter. Perfect. And then we will be closing the h1 tag. In case if the user hasn't supplied any value, then I'm going to say message equals to, let's say you haven't supplied any value for the message as part of the query string. So that's how we were checking for the message as part of your query string parameter. So you can obviously be passing any number of parameters. Let's say we would like to also pass another parameter, something like say country. So I'm going to check for the existence of the country parameter. So then the country is so and so. Otherwise, you haven't supplied any value for the country. What if the user supplies values for both parameters? So in that case, let's define a message with a default value, and then you can say message plus equals to everywhere. And finally, once the value is pretty much stored inside our message, so we're going to simply render this. So I will simply say render in the HTML format. So what we want to render is the message, and because we were using some HTML tags, I'm going to use the HTML underscore safe. So this is how in this second action we were checking for the message parameter as well as the country parameter as part of the URL query string. And because we have come up with a new action, so obviously I need to make an entry in my routes.rb. So I'm going to say home/get query string values is the route path. And if you type that path, then I should be taking to the home controllers get query string values action. I'm just trying to give both the strings as same, but it's not necessary that you can give any route path of your choice. So this is how we're done here. So I'm going to save both my files, and let's go back to the browser. And this time I'm going to type home/get query string values, and then I press enter. So it is going to tell me that you haven't supplied any value for message and you haven't supplied any value for country. But what if I go here and then I say message equals to hello and country equals to India, and then I press enter. So this time it is able to grab the value of the message parameter from here and then the country parameter from here. So that is how we've seen how to pass values as part of the query string, and how do we read the values of those query string parameters with the params hash. In fact, the params hash also stores the controller and then the action that is being just executed. So let's say, for example, somewhere at the end of my code, I'm going to say message plus equals to, I'm going to say your controller name is, from the params hash, we're going to access a special parameter called as the controller itself. Perfect. So let me take one more line. So this time I also want to grab the action name, so I can type action here. So notice we don't have to really supply any value for controller and action, just like how we supplied the value for country and message, because these are predefined parameters that it uses in the params hash. So if I save it now, if I go back to browser and if I refresh, now you can see the controller name that you're trying to access is home, and then the action name is the get query string values. So that is how in this example I've shown you how to read the query string values. In this lecture, I'll explain to you how we can pass data from the controller's actions to the views. Notice in the very first two basic examples, we were rendering some text, or either in the plain format or in HTML format, directly from the controller's action. We have never used views so far. So we were just working with controllers. We still have to see how do we work with views and how do we have to work with models in MVC scenario. So first I would like to show you how to get started with the views. So what's the plan here? I'm going to come up with a new action. Let's call this as pass data to views is my new action. So what's the plan here? The output of the program should be similar to the very first action, which is the index action. So I'm going to copy and have this code here. So technically we were just having one message variable, and this data we would like to access it in the views. So right now this is just an ordinary local variable. So this value I would like to access it in the views. So whenever you wanted to use views, the first and foremost thing is back in the views folder, go to the folder exactly where the folder is matching to your controller name and create a new HTML file with this name of the action. So inside my home folder, I'm going to create a new file called as the pass data to views, which is my action name. And the extension has to be html.erb, your embedded Ruby. So this is your ERB engine or ERB templating engine. So the plan here is I want to access this variable here. So whenever you have a controller action and it is having some variables and you want to use those variables inside the corresponding template, then you need to make them as the instance variable by prefixing your variable with the @ sign here. So that is how we were having the instance variable called as message. So once it's been identified as an instance variables are by default accessible for you in the view templates. So inside my html.erb, I'm going to have a condition or a block of code here. I'm going to say using or accessing instance variables inside the template. So I'm going to say accessing instance variables is the heading that we will be having inside the template, and I'm going to have some div tag here, and inside the div tag we want to access that instance variable, which is message. Now the most important thing here, because this is a server-side variable and whereas the rest of the code in this html.erb is a client-side code, so you need to mix the server-side code with the client-side code when you're accessing the server-side functionalities. We can do that by using less than percentage equals to percentage greater than ERB tags here. So why am I using equals to sign here? Because we want to evaluate the value of this variable and the result of that variable we would like to substitute here. Perfect. Now let's save this page. And we want to test this because we have come up with a new action. So as I told you earlier, you need to go to the routes.rb file and then you should say get home / pass data to views is my route path. And we would like to call home controller's action called as pass data to views with this # separator. Nice. So now if I go back to my browser, and this time I'm going to change this to pass data to views, and then I press enter. So now you can see it is saying accessing instance variables, and it is rendering the value of that message instance variable. Notice that everything is coming to you as a plain text because we haven't called the html.safe method. In fact, you can call the html safe method inside the template itself. Now I save this, I go back to my browser, I refresh it. Now you can see accessing instance variables, and this value is coming from the controller's action, and whatever instance variable we were using in the controller's action, we are now able to access it inside the template itself in the view html.erb file. So that is how we have to prefix the variable name with the @ sign to make that as an instance variable, and Rails framework will take care of making the instance variable available to the template at runtime automatically. In this example, we will be creating another action in the home controller. Again, we will be using instance variables, but this time I just want to display the current date and time with the help of the view helper methods. So what I'm going to do, I'm coming up with a new action. Let's call this as show date time info is going to be my action. And I'm going to create an instance variable, something like say current time equals to, I'm going to say date time dot now. So now the date and time value is inside this instance variable. So now for this action, we need to create a view. So back in my home folder, I'm going to create a new view. Let's call this as show date time info.html.erb. And inside this HTML template, we would like to display the current date and time as individual informations here. So let's say, for example, from that current time instance variable, we just want to extract the month. So I'm going to say some paragraph. So I'm going to say month value is, I should say, less than percentage equals to your instance variable is current time. and then I'm going to access the month here. So it is going to only extract the month for me. Okay, let me copy this. This time I'll go for day, and let's have the day value is so and so, and let's go for the weekday and the day in the year, hours, minutes, seconds, and some time zone. So we are just having different values here. So I'm going to access the weekday here. Perfect. And the next one is day in the year. So for the day in the year, we will be accessing the property y dot day. This is W means weekday. And then we want to access the hour value, which is hour. And then we want to access the minutes. And this is going to be current time dot min. And finally, we want to access the seconds also. And this is going to be SEC for you. And finally, we would like to access the time zone. So I'm going to say zone is, and then we're going to say current time dot zone. So that is how we were just trying to access the instance variable current time, and we are extracting the month, day, weekday, year day, hours, minutes, seconds, and the time zone here. Perfect. So now we would like to test this. So for that, I need to copy my action here, and then back in my routes.rb file, I'm going to say if the user types home/date show date time info, then we should be going to the home controllers show date time info. So everything is good. Let's go back to the browser, and this time I'm going to say home/show date time info, and then I press enter. So now you can see month is March and day is 1, weekday is 5, day in the year is 61, hours, minutes, seconds, and then the time zone. So that is how, again, we used instance variable concept, so wherein we were able to pass this instance variable from the controller's action to the view, and we are just trying to extract the date and time values. Okay, it looks like we were extracting month and day, but not the year. So what we can do, we can also extract the value of the year. So year is current time dot year. Let's go back to browser and refresh. Now we can see month, day, year, weekday, day in the year, hours, minutes, seconds, and then the time zone. So that's how we've seen how to pass instance variables from the controller's actions to the views. In this lecture, we will see how do we pass multiple variables from your controller's actions to the template. So notice in the previous two examples of instance variables, so we were hardly passing one single variable from the controller's action to the view. But if you have multiple variables, the easiest way is to create a hash of key value pairs, and then you can access that object inside your view. So what's the plan here? I'm going to create a new action here. Let's call this as conditional rendering. So that's going to be my new action. So this time I'm going to create a hash object here by saying at data, because it's an instance variable. So we're going to create an instance variable called as at data. And then within the curly braces, we would like to have keys and values. I'm going to have a property called as name. Okay, let's give some name like Jimmy Anderson. And we would like to also store a value for the is visible. So I would like to take a Boolean variable here. So we are having a string value here, a Boolean value here. And also I would like to have another Boolean variable, whether the person is currently logged in or not. And also we would like to maintain the country code. And finally, I would like to also have another key called as work experience. And then we have another key, something like say state code, and I'm initializing with the nil value here. So this is how we have an instance variable called as at data, and which has got name, is visible, logged in, country code, work experience, and state code. Now you have access to this variable in the new template. So let's go back to the views home folder, and I'm going to create a new html.erb file. Let's call this as conditional rendering.html.erb. So I want to access all those hash keys what we have in that instance variable at data, and then we would like to display that using some HTML table. So we are having a table tag, and yes, we are having a new row, and inside the row we would like to have 6 different cells here. So I'm going to have a td and /td. So let's copy this and make it 6 times. And first one is the name, and the next one is the whether is visible and is logged in. So that's going to be the heading, and we would like to also have the country code and number of years in work experience, and finally the state code. Now inside your table body, we would like to display the actual values of these variables. So whenever you want to access the instance variable, like we know that we have to use add data, but inside add data we have name, is visible, logged in, country code, work experience, and state code. The syntax is almost similar when we were accessing the query string values. Params itself is a hash internally, so we were accessing the properties like message, country, or controller, or action. So we will be using the same syntax to access the different keys that we have in this hash. So back in my template, I'm going to say I'm going to have my first td, and whenever you want to substitute the result of an expression in Rails, you should say less than, percentage equals to, percentage greater than, and you access your instance variable, and what's the key you want to access is the name itself. Perfect. So let's copy this and have another 5 times, and this time we want to access the second property, which is visible, and this is logged in, and this is going to be my country code, and this is going to be work experience, and finally we have the state code here. So let me verify it. State code, work experience, country code, and everything. So country code is actually like this. Yeah, perfect. Work experience is fine. State code is also perfect. So that is how we were just trying to print the values of these different keys that we have in that hash by using the add data square brackets colon and then the hash key here. So everything is perfect. So let me create a new route entry by going to the routes.rb. So then we will say get home / conditional rendering, and it should take me to the home controller's conditional rendering. Nice. So when I go back to my browser, and then we're going to simply access conditional rendering, and then when I press enter, we are supposed to see the values of those properties. So I'm getting an error here, country code. Let me verify the spelling. So this is country code, and this is country code. Okay, it looks like the mistake here I did is I gave an extra space here. So now everything is okay. Let's go back to browser and refresh it. So this time I'm able to access the name, is visible, is logged in, country code, work experience, and of course the state code is null. So that is how in this example we were able to pass an instance variable that is having a bunch of keys. So let's say, for example, you want to apply Bootstrap to this website. So then I can go to getbootstrap.com, and from here we're going to access the CDN URLs for the Bootstrap. So I'm going to copy this, go back to your code, and you need to import the Bootstrap into your main layouts file so that you will see in the views layouts folder. There is a very special file called as application.html.erb, and this is the base page, or what we call it as the master page from which all your HTML files were inherited or derived. Of course, we will try to concentrate more on the application pages, application.html.erb bit later, but currently in the head section of this page, I'm going to take into references my CSS. And now if I go back to my html.erb, then I will be using the Bootstrap class as table. And now if I go back to my browser, and if we can refresh, we now have the Bootstrap in place. Of course, we have taken Bootstrap into references in the master page because this is the main page. Inside this page, the output of this page is yielded. So now you can see in the application.html.erb, in the body section, there is something like less than percentage equals to yield. So whichever controller's action you are trying to call, the output of that specific view will be substituted between body and /body with the help of the yield. So that's the main purpose of the master page, to maintain the consistent look and feel across the different pages of your website. Of course, we'll be creating our own master pages in the upcoming lectures, but I had to show you this file because I wanted to have the Bootstrap here. So that is how, in this example, we now have seen how to access a hash of keys by passing the instance variable to the view.